felt like we had been transported back in time, like 150 years ago. It's quite windy, right? And it's dark, and there's no lights outside. It's a bit creepy.
A private nature reserve in South Africa. No roads, no neighbours, just candlelight and silence. For magician Sean Borland, this old house was the perfect setting.
I've always just been looking for the right venue, the right kind of atmosphere, the right group of people. So I decide, you know what? I am going to do a seance.
Sean performed something called the Oracle Act, a Victorian era illusion that's designed to convince a room that spirits are answering their questions.
So one of the questions was, should I leave my husband? I, just decided to kind of be as diplomatic as possible there.
Later that evening, another act showed just how powerful belief can be.
I hypnotized the girl and she more or less fainted. I actually had to support her, hold her, and sit her down in a chair. She was completely out. Never had that type of reaction before. I think it was just all the energy in the room.
That night was also a turning point for Sean.
Yeah, that was kind of like the beginning of the end, actually. At that point, the journey felt complete.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of No Ordinary Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Chris Barron, and each week I invite a guest onto the show to walk us through the most extraordinary experience that they've ever had on the job. We start with the path that led them there, we explore what the job's really like behind the scenes, and at the end they reveal the hard-earned lessons they've picked up along the way. My guest today is Sean Borland. Sean is a professional magician who has performed for multiple billionaires, for royalty and A-list celebrities, working everywhere from the streets of Sydney to some of the most exclusive resorts in the world. He has mastered sleight of hand, hypnosis, psychological illusion, and the art of persuasion at the very highest level. But at the height of his career, in a candlelit house in a remote part of South Africa, he performed a seance. It was a night that marked what he describes as the beginning of the end. In this episode, we explore extreme dedication, sacrifice, and the psychology of belief, and why someone who achieved amazing career success would choose to walk away. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. Sean, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I'm good. Another day, another rupiah in Indonesia.
Absolutely. So you say that where in the world are you based at the moment?
Right now, I'm in a place called Kidungu in Bali, which, if you're familiar with Canggu, it's maybe just about 15 minutes north from there.
Brilliant. You're literally just around the corner from me in some ways. I mean, not in Bali, but I guess from a global perspective, I'm just, on the island of Java, which is probably less than an hour flight from you. So it's a nice change. We're both 9 o'clock in the morning, it's not like midnight for one and early morning for the other.
And unusually, we more or less have the same accent, which is not that common when you're on a podcast in Indonesia. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, there you go.
Yeah, two Scots in Indonesia on a podcast. It's, yeah, exactly. It's amazing. I'm more curious, just as a performer because you've done, we'll go into it for sure in a bit, but you've done places like Sydney and all over the world, really. I'm curious, just in terms of the audiences, are they different in places like Southeast Asia versus Australia versus Europe versus the States? As a different vibe depending who you're performing to?
Yeah. I mean, I think the context of the environment also makes a big difference. So I could be in the UK, I could be in London or Scotland or South America, Australia, and it would be very different depending on the venue. So I realized that quite quickly when I was my sort of first foray into performing for people, and actually the first time I ever made any money was as a busker. It was extremely difficult to find someone to hire me. I really didn't know what I was doing. I'm sure we'll get into that, but I really
Aye.
embraced magic and kind of the idea of becoming a magician. It was like a marriage of love. I wasn't thinking, oh, this is how I'm going to have a career or make money or pay my rent. I was just madly in love with magic as a sort of fan, and like a very passionate, curious learner. So anyway, eventually when it came to the point where I had been studying and practicing for about 3 years, I had to sort of transition into uh, performing, and that happened in Sydney. And after a few months of performing as a busker on the street, both during the day and at night, I got my first corporate gig. And I went to this corporate gig and did exactly the same material, and it was received completely differently. And I just thought, oh, this
Wow.
is interesting. I'm doing it for Australian people in Sydney, but when you take me off of the street with a little table, and if you've ever seen people in Covent Garden or
Yep.
Darling Harbour, or anywhere where cruise ships are coming off, and you'll see street
Yeah.
performers kind of doing it with like a semicircle around them. It was very much
Yeah.
like that. Um, but yeah, where I think the sort of main cultural differences come in is places like China and Japan. So
Mm.
I've performed at the Four Seasons Hotel in Tokyo, and very different. I ended up doing like a very visual style of magic. I think that was also to compensate for the fact that I don't speak any
Language
Japanese.
barrier. Yeah.
Um, and then it also depends on people's profession. So I've been hired to do things before at like work events for an accounting firm, for example, primarily all men, 90% guys. Sorry, accountants, but quite geeky, all kind of number crunchers. And then I've also done stuff for like, back in the day, like hen parties, where it's
Hmm.
maybe like
Yep.
10 women who are all like in their early 30s and have had quite a few drinks and are a bit more, boisterous. And that again completely changes the vibe. So it's,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it's different every time.
Interesting, fascinating. I mean, you mentioned just briefly there on like how you got into it, but I really want to dive into that in terms of the backstory. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of careers out there that we've even covered on the podcast that people know from like I was like 6 years old, and from that point, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for my entire life. I mean, was magic like that? Was there a moment when you were a kid where you're like, okay, this magic thing is like what I want to do the rest of my life, or was there like a trick or something you saw on telly that you were like, that's what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, good question. We may as well start at the beginning.
The beginning, yeah.
So yeah, so when I was a child, yes and no would be my answer to that. When I was a child, I had never ever thought I'm going to be a magician professionally, or that's what I want to do. But I did have a very sort of formative experience, or sort of like pivotal experience, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. Even though both my parents are Scottish, I actually grew up in Crete in Greece,
Oh, wow.
and as part of the sort of expat local community, we would go to church. I'm not a religious person now, but when I was a child, I would go to church. It was a Catholic church in Hania, which is on the west side of Crete, and it was a very sort of cosmopolitan uh, group of people that would go. And there was one guy who was a Filipino gentleman, American Filipino, who had been a professional magician and traveled all over the world. And he was retired now and somehow had ended up living in Crete. Anyway, he used to show the children, magic after church. And I was just so enamored. I was like absolutely mesmerized. And he actually started to show me how some of it was done. And he gave me some, magic tricks that he had made, or I don't know, bought from a magic shop. And for about a year or two, it was like a kind of special thing in my life. But then forgot all about it, moved on, did other things. I stopped going to church when I was about like 11 or 12. And then it wasn't until I was 17 or 18 and I started seeing Derren Brown on TV around maybe 2000, 2001. And I was just really fascinated by the psychological aspect of it. But still at that point, I had not yet made the realization that that's what I wanted to do with my life. That happened when I was 24.
Interesting. So that's quite a big gap, actually. So, like, did you have a different career trajectory before that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did the usual thing. I went to university. I studied business management and Spanish. I had a part-time job at the time in Scotland working for Specsavers, the opticians. I used to do that
Yeah.
on the weekends. In the summer, I would go away. I was like a club holiday rep in the Greek
Yep.
islands because I had, grown up in Greece. I can speak Greek. I would go back there in the summer. And when I graduated, it just so happened, coincidentally, Specsavers were opening up stores in Spain. They rightly or wrongly assumed that I could speak Spanish because I had done it at university. I couldn't, by the way. I got a rude awakening when I showed up in Spain. Um, anyway, I ended up working over there for 4 years and 2 years into uh, living there, working there full time. By this point, I was like the assistant manager in the store, and no offense to Specsavers, anyone who works there, but I just really thought, "Ah, this is so boring. Like, surely there's.
Mm,
I thought I was supposed to do something a bit more interesting with my life. I'd always been
mm.
very uh, curious and use my imagination, and I had a kind of strong desire to travel and meet other people, and I just thought this just feels very easy. And it was at that point, 2 years into living in Spain, so 2009, when I happened to go to, very randomly, a magic show, like a dinner and performance show, like the kind of old school Vegas style you would think of, where people are sitting at like a small round table, and you're in a kind of theater in a hotel. And it was a girlfriend at the time, who got free tickets through her work. I didn't even really want to go, but I was so, I don't know, just blown away. It was an incredible experience. The people performing were really, really fantastic. Oscar, Renzo, and Mara. Just for the record, that was their names. Oscar and Renzo were
Wow.
brothers. Mara was one of them, one of their girlfriends, and their father is a guy called Hans Kazan, who is probably one of the greatest magicians ever. He's a Dutch magician, and up until recently, he was performing in Macau, so like the sort of Southeast
Yeah.
Asia
Casino.
version
Yeah. Yeah.
of Vegas. So anyway, I went along to this thing, and I just had a sort of aha moment. I think people thought I had lost my mind, but on the way back in the car, I announced to my then girlfriend, "I'm going to be a professional magician. That's what I'm going to do with my life." And that was kind of like a line in the sand. There was like a before and after.
And I guess something like magic, I think anyone who kind of seen shows like that, that's not something you can just like pick up in a week. Like that sort of level of magic takes a lot of time, dedication, training, research, everything. Like, is that from that point when you decided this is what I'm going to do with my life? I'm going to become a professional magician. Like the level of work that you put into it, how long did that take till you actually sort of started having the confidence to go out there and going, I'm going to do this, right now as for crowds.
What's your favorite sport?
I'm going to go rock climbing. I have a few, but rock
Rock
climbing is the
climbing.
first one that came
Okay.
to head.
So I imagine that the majority of people who do rock climbing are probably amateurs, and rock climbing's maybe
Hmm.
a good analogy actually here. Very few people actually make it to like a professional level. I imagine that to be sponsored, or to actually, make more than, if we're saying 100 grand a year is like a decent amount of money. It gets smaller and smaller, and then you probably only have a very tiny, tiny group of people who ever make it to be household names, and famous, or maybe even like immortal, where they would still be known in 50 years or 100 years after they've died.
Hmm.
So it really depends with magic. If you want to do some decent level, I don't like using the word tricks, but let's just call it that for lack of a better word, for your friends and family. Yeah, I mean, it takes a little bit of time and practice, but it can be quite accessible. But I was really aiming for, I mean, at the time, I wanted to be the best magician in the world. That was what I was aiming for. So it's a bit like a sport, or playing piano or violin. If you've ever, tried to play
Hmm.
like an instrument, um, most people, what actually beats them and what kind of stops them from, really taking it to like a very high level, is the boredom, is the
Hmm.
consistency. Because eventually, like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years have gone by, and you're just working on these basics. I was incredibly lucky. Just a few things. It was very serendipitous. A few things just happened to fall into place for me. Like the guy who I eventually met and who taught me. I made some difficult decisions at the time. Like I broke up with my girlfriend. I was given some advice by a guy who I met who was a professional magician. He advised it'd be much better to be single. So I was kind of like engaged at the time, and living with my
Oh
girlfriend.
wow!
But yeah, I broke
Is
up
that
with her.
single because of the amount of dedication it's going to take, or single because of what was the why be single?
Well, yeah, so I decided I want to become a magician, right? And it just kind of hit me like a lightning rod, and all of a sudden I was super focused. I mean, it was like almost, I imagine, like it was similar to falling in love. I've been in love a couple of times in my life, and it was I would actually say magic is probably the love of my life. Other than my
Wow.
ex-wife, who, the woman who I married, magic really just, I don't know, it hit me like a kind of lightning bolt. And I got home and I lived on the sixth floor at the time of this apartment building in Fingarola, just outside Malaga. And I walk up six floors. The lift wasn't working. I didn't even own a laptop at the time. I mean, I was 24, but I don't know. The internet wasn't that super common. This was still a while ago. And anyway, I ended up walking back down at 11 o'clock at night, find an all night internet cafe, and went on, paid for like an hour's worth of internet on this old computer and typed in how to become a professional magician. And I just followed exactly what this said. Some guy had written a blog. He said it's almost impossible. Probably don't recommend you do this. Even if you get to the level where you're at a professional level, you're probably not going to make any money. It requires a lot of luck. Uh, Somehow, one thing led to another. I end up performing almost immediately. Like, I wasn't lacking in confidence. I was definitely lacking in technique and skill, but I learned uh, some basic magic from like the infancy of YouTube at the time, back in 2008, 2009, and ended up somehow getting introduced to a professional magician, which was just bizarre. I was in a bar. This Uruguayan guy in an Irish bar says to me, "Oh, you're a magician. That guy over there is a magician too." And I all of a sudden, got a massive dose of imposter syndrome. Thought, "Oh my god, I'm not a real magician." This is an English guy who works at the Torre Quebrada Hotel and does stuff in like Marbella. Thankfully, it was very nice. It was actually around this time of year. It was around Christmas time. And he
Uh-huh.
said to me, "I'm actually going to the magic store in Malaga tomorrow with a friend of mine who's also a magician. Would you like to come?" And this was just two weeks later after I decided to sort of dedicate my life to this. By
Yeah.
this point, I had already spent 300 or 400 euros ordering books online. I'd found like an online bookstore in the UK. I was getting that stuff
Yeah.
shipped over. Fast forward about 18 months later, I am now going to every single magic performance that I can. And there was a guy who probably is I believe, the greatest close up magician ever from Spain. And he
Mm.
happened to also live in that area. By consistently going to his shows and just kind of, just always kind of being around. Eventually, I got to know him a little bit. I avoided the whole fanboy thing of like, "Oh my God, you're amazing. Can I have your autograph?" I just always tried to go and be, well dressed and respectful, wait for an organic opportunity to get to know him. We went out for dinner as a group. And after dinner, it turned out that he was driving right past my house. So there was him, one of his friends, myself, and my friend who was also a magician. And he said, "I'll give you guys a lift." So, and I don't know, this is kind of embarrassing to admit this, but it turned out to be probably the best night of my life. Ended up coming back to my apartment, same apartment, sixth floor, uh, at 2 a.m. And we were still there at like 6 a.m. in the morning. And this guy just did like an absolute masterclass of the most
Oh my.
unbelievable magic you could possibly imagine. If you know, obviously, who David Blaine is, or David
Yeah.
Copperfield, at that level.
Yeah.
And sorry, this very long-winded answer is
No,
coming
no,
up
no,
to
no.
this point.
It's
But
brilliant.
I said to him, "Listen, look, how did you get so good? Like, I'm not messing around. Like, I'm already practicing all day, all the time, and I'm absorbing this stuff like a sponge. Like, how did you get so good?" And he sort of like leaned over as if he was about to tell me a secret. So I was like, "Oh, he's going to say something really profound." And this is exactly how he said it. I'm not exaggerating. It sounds quite crude, but he said, "Get rid of your girlfriend." And I was like, "What
What?
do you mean?" And he went, "No distractions." He just says, "Your magic's not very good. Your technique's not very good. If you're in any way serious about becoming professional, you can't have any distractions. Just get rid of your girl." That's what he said. "Get
Wow.
rid of your girlfriend and then quit your
Wow.
job."
Yeah.
So that was it. So I just followed his advice. So 6 months later, I was single. And then I did quit my job and I moved to China for a year. And I lived in China for 12 months where I had absolute peace and quiet, no distractions. I very deliberately chose a place in the middle of nowhere. I lived in a place called Shanxi with two A's.
Mm.
There's Shanxi with one A, Shanxi with two A's. and I spent just over uh, 12 months there, and I practiced 10 hours a day every day. So that was my technique sort of year.
Like a Shaolin monk kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a bit of a masochist. It seems to appeal to me things where you've really
Yeah.
got to sort of like I've done a lot of different 100-day challenges and 6-month challenges and everything else. But this, I knew why I was going. I had a spreadsheet. I logged all my hours. I had a certain amount of books I wanted to read, and I just treated it the same way if you were like a junior tennis player or a snooker player or something where it requires a lot of
Yep.
individual, practice. And I learned to love the practice. Actually, it was one of the best times of my life. So it was quite lonely because I was the only foreigner other than one guy who lived in the city. But it was
Mm.
exactly what was needed at the time, and I feel as if I really accelerated my the kind of more mechanical, the sleight of hand part of it. That's only one piece,
Yeah.
but it was a very well spent year.
That is amazing. I just want to go back to that masterclass you got from that guy in Spain. Like, was that like like a show, or did he kind of did he let you look behind the curtain of how these things were done?
No, he was the ultimate performer. I mean, he was
Right.
a so good that he was a magician's magician. So he would perform for
Wow.
groups of magicians, people who had been studying magic, performing magic. It's quite a once you get into this and you realize it's a subculture that exists. It's like a very geeky kind of studious pursuit, So there's a lot of people who will argue with each other over, no, no. If you look at this book and chapter 7, page 72, this is how
Yeah.
you stick a piece of rope in your pocket without people seeing it. So he could perform for people like that, and he would still be able to give them that feeling of awe and wonder and to experience the magic. So every now and again, he would throw you a little golden nugget
Mm.
of information, or just like there were certain things that he said to me that really stuck with me and have, I guess, become sort of distilled into the way I perform. In the beginning, I guess, if I'm being completely honest, I was doing what I would call like a kind of crude impersonation of him, and then
Mm.
eventually I developed my own sense of style. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, wow, it was just such an amazing opportunity, and the way he said it to me really just it made me realize that there's a price to pay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you want to be
Yeah.
really good at something, you can't do everything.
No, it's as you said, it's the same for a lot of things. Being a professional athlete or musician, like that has to become the love of your life, and it is really because I'd always wondered about you know, the secrets of these tricks are professional secrets. They're the things that, people have spent years mastering or coming up with or devising themselves. And I'd wondered even, you working with people like you never really give away, it doesn't matter who it is, as that you were with this absolute master, magician's magician, and you were clearly like, students of magic and wanting to learn. But it's just really interesting that even then he wasn't going to be like, okay, let me tell you how this is done. He was just more like, let me just wow you guys with how all this stuff works.
Yeah, I mean, it's counterproductive to what your job is as a magician. It's
Mm.
not so much about guarding a secret and then maybe you give someone the secret. It's more about creating an opportunity where people can experience magic. So that's
Yeah.
that's how I've kind of come to see it, is you've got to create a context where people can experience that abstract feeling of magic, and by reducing it down to it's all I don't want to be too airy fairy or abstract here, but reducing it down to something that you can just put into words in a simple explanation doesn't actually do justice to all of the things that are going on. I mean, most of it is actually happening in the spectator's own mind. People
Hmm.
self-convince themselves, and if you're a skilled magician, you can nudge people in the right direction and just give them a little hint, and essentially they fill in the blanks. So it's very important to uh, speak as little as possible, actually, and let the effect breathe on its own.
Interesting. And you mentioned different types of magicians. So you've got obviously close-up magicians, you've got, illusionists, you've got, the David Blaines who do this, and the Houdinis that do the sort of, escape artist kind of stuff. What kind of magician, or which sort of genre of magic do you fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been completely fine with just calling myself a magician. For some
Okay.
people, it's a bit of a dirty word. People think, oh, it's too associated with like top hats and bunny rabbits or children's entertainers. So you'll have a lot of people, especially in the last 15 years, who say, I'm a psychological illusionist or I'm a
Okay, yeah.
mentalist. I just love all of it. I mean, if I was going to narrow it down, I guess you could probably say I'm a close up card magician because that is what I spend most of my time working on, and that is probably my speciality. But I've also done hypnosis shows, with absolutely no close up magic at all, like for an hour on stage. I've done mentalism. I did a TEDx performance back in 2016 here in Bali, actually, in Ubud,
Yeah.
and that was all mind reading. I have done all the classics, all the Paul Daniels stuff, like cups and balls and cutting ropes and bringing them back
Wow.
together. I've made a horse appear and disappear on a beach. You can find that somewhere on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I've done stuff like that.
You've done so
Uh,
much, yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I think close up magic, improvised, sort of spontaneous close up magic is my preference.
Yeah, interesting, interesting. Um, I would love, if possible, we were kind of talking about it before we kind of came on. If there's anything that we can do here on the show, that I know it's a weird medium for doing magic and performing and stuff, but is there anything that we can kind of try out?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, try is a good word. I've never really done this before on a podcast, but
Yeah.
just so that everyone knows, this is like very important. Just please confirm, Chris. I haven't asked you to agree to anything, or we haven't set anything up because I'm sure a lot of people watching or listening to this will just say, "Oh, well, he's obviously just said, listen, I'll give you a tenner after the show. Just
And
play along."
I've always watched those shows and they say that thing and I'm like, oh, of course they're a plant or whatever. But I can genuinely say no, we have chatted before the show, but we didn't chat about what this trick would be or anything like that. And also just to mention, this show goes out on audio and on YouTube as well. So if you want to see the visuals of this, because I don't know what Sean's going to do, but if for the audio guys, we'll try and make it visual as well. So yeah.
So let's just start off with something easy. Let's just start off with a visualization exercise. So let's start off with something like, say, maybe a star sign. Okay, I think that's quite universal, and a lot of people who are listening will be able to like understand and hopefully visualize this along with you. So I could potentially know your star sign, Chris, because I'm sure it's available somewhere on the internet. I could have worked it out if I know your birthday. I know you're married. I could potentially even have worked out your wife's birthday and know her star sign. So could you think of someone like in your family, like your mother, your father, maybe a brother or sister, just someone else's star sign. Or if you want, you could just pick an absolute random one. Just there's 12 of them. Just pick one. It's very important that it's just impossible for me to know which one it would be.
Okay, I think I've got one. I was trying to remember them actually because I was trying to, flicker through them, but I think I've got one. Yeah.
Yeah, just let one like just pop into your head. Don't worry about it too much. Just
Yeah.
they're all as good as each other. So once you've got it, just take a second and just lock it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it locked in.
Got it.
Okay, it's very important
Yeah.
that you stay with it now because we're going to visualize it. So, like for example, in my mind, what's coming to me is Leo. So I'm just saying
Hmm.
Leo, Leo, Leo over and over again. It's not Leo, right? Don't use that one. You're not
It's
thinking
not
of
Leo.
Leo,
No.
right?
No,
Okay,
I'm
good.
not. No.
Okay, so that's the one I'm thinking of, and I'm gonna visualize it. I'm gonna see the letters in my mind, and the way I'm gonna do this is imagine a big sort of blank cinema screen, like a white screen. You're the only person sitting in the cinema, and you're looking up, and I want you to see the letters. So for me, Leo. So just take a second and go through and see them and try and really sort of try and project them, try and really
Hmm.
illuminate them, make them big. So I don't know. I'm just taking a guess here, right? But like intuitively, the feeling I get is that you're you're looking at an R for Romeo. There's definitely an R there, correct?
No,
Oh, there's not. Okay, interesting. Okay, so maybe we're not on sync with this. So this is why I said we'll try.
let's try it.
But yeah, it's good to try. Now I'll tell you something that before we started. For some reason, before we even began the podcast, I thought that you were going to go with Pisces. That was like the strong feeling I had. And I was just thinking to myself, for some reason, it's going to be Pisces. I don't know why, but that's the one he's going to go for.
Yeah, that was the one I was in my head. Yeah, that's bizarre, and because it wasn't the first one I chose, and I probably had three or four before that. Obviously, I went through mine. I went through my wife's, and I said, "Don't choose them." And then I just tried remembering any of the others.
One
I
of
was
them,
kind
one
of
of them was in Cancer, was it?
I flicked through Cancer. Yeah, that's one of
Yeah,
them, and the other I very briefly thought about was the Scorpio. Scorpio
yeah,
was another one.
yeah. So Cancer is my star sign,
Yeah,
and it's amazing
yeah,
how often this kind of like happens, where people end up thinking of my star sign for some
yeah.
reason. So I was going to go Cancer, but
That's
Pisces
so
is the one
cool.
that Pisces is the one that I was thinking of before we did this. I thought I have a very strong feeling that he's going to go for Pisces. Um,
Is that I mean, I don't need to give away anything, but like, is that genuinely something that you can read? Because I had no idea what we were going to do here. Was that something genuinely you're reading in me, or was that something that you can project into people? Or if you can't give it away, you can't give it away.
I mean, you're asking the right questions. You're asking the right questions. There's two kind of ways. There's two
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
ways to do that. Like if you're a fan
yeah.
of
Oh
Darren
man,
Brown,
yeah,
he's
yeah,
an interesting guy because I mean his stuff is so entertaining, but it's also
yeah.
it's so interesting from a sort of engineering point of view. If
Uh-huh,
you are like a
uh-huh.
fellow performer, just looking at
Yeah,
the way if you were to deconstruct his material, essentially, yes, you can either pick up. There are certain things that you can use and do to pick up on what someone else is thinking, or there are certain things you can do to nudge someone in the right direction in order to sort of almost
interesting.
implant.
Yeah, I know you're not going to tell me, but it is one of those things where everybody wants to know. I think what is going on and how you're doing it because it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you can take this as a compliment or not or whatever, but you would not typically be the person who I would choose to do that type of
Uh huh.
effect with. I would
Yep.
say you're like a medium, like a 5 or a 6 out of 10, because
Readable. Yeah.
typically I don't do the psychological stuff with men. I find women are a lot more open to it and receptive
Oh,
and
interesting.
actually less skeptical, and that's not anything to do with I'm not being
Yeah. Yeah.
critical of women or being like a misogynist or
Yeah.
anything. It just not all women, but some women tend to just be more less competitive. Sometimes
Yeah.
men want to sort of almost block it because it's kind of like oh, you're not going to read my mind. Where women are like,
It's a
oh, let's see what
competition.
happens.
Yeah.
I'm a bit more open. But you seem to be very friendly and open, which is good. But normally the success rate for that type of thing goes up a lot higher with a woman, and especially if it's someone who I get to interact with first. So that's
Yep.
to share a little bit of insight here into how these things actually work. I would say ninety
Yeah.
percent of it is choosing the right spectator. So usually, and this is a kind of trade secret here, but usually I would meet some of them beforehand. I would maybe
Ah.
walk
Okay.
around people who've arrived
Mm-hmm.
early, and I would just say hello and just make a little bit of chit chat.
Oh,
Just
interesting.
small
Yeah.
talk, nothing to do with the performance. And if they seem overly excited, some people really love magic, and some people will
Yeah.
go to an astronomer.
Yep.
Sorry,
Astrologer.
astrologer. Yes, not
Yeah.
astronomer. I don't want the people who go to astronomers. Astrologer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
they'll regularly go to an astrologer. They might have a psychic. Maybe they're, you know, have a guardian angel, whatever. Just anything which is a little bit more about feeling. And they might not necessarily be able to explain if you were to say to them, how did you reach that conclusion? What was your thought process? They
Yeah.
don't know. A lot of times people can't answer that. It's just more, well, it feels good to me and I like it. That's the type of person I want.
Absolutely. And, what I love, because obviously that's something that I think a lot of people might have seen with Darren Brown, and he does and I think what's amazing is because Darren always goes back to the sort of history of stuff when he does shows. And you can really imagine if you had performed something like you just did on me back in the 1800s or whatever, you can really understand where that idea of like witchcraft or whatever even before, because it is so convincing. I gave you nothing, we didn't do anything before.
Yeah, I mean the and I guess not to steer, not to move into like a potentially more like controversial topic, but the psychic world or the psychic industry, if you can call it that,
Mm,
is a multi-billion-dollar
true,
industry, per
true.
year, and I could have made a lot more money being
Yeah,
a fake psychic than I have as a magician. So if your
yeah,
motivation was either some sort of ego thing, or you just want to be famous and do kind of like one of those ghost show things. But a
yeah,
big part, like going back to the study, a big part was the sleight of hand, and you have to become ambidextrous. For example, I only used my left hand for 2 years. I completely switched over,
wow,
so I only wrote with my left hand. I switched my knife and fork. I brushed my teeth with my left hand. I played the guitar
wow,
upside down. I forced
wow.
myself to become ambidextrous. Played snooker with my left hand, but the biggest part was actually the psychology. So I
Yeah,
think understanding the nature of belief and what makes people believe certain things, why they're motivated to believe certain things, how people construct reality as it's happening. Uh, Once you really understand the sort of core concepts, you then move beyond sort of tricks. Because a lot of people, I think of a very
mm,
mechanical counting out piles of cards into numbers, and
yeah,
everything is like a very logical sequence where you do this, then you do this. Once you understand um, the underlying psychological kind of concepts behind the subjective nature of belief and why someone would want to experience magic or believe magic, then you can just kind of make it up on the spot almost.
amazing, amazing. um well, I love when guests come on to ask them to sort of, and I'm sure you've had an amazing career as a magician. I said, working all the way from street magic, and busking in the streets in Sydney, to working, with some of the highest sort of, earners and celebrities in the world. F- What is the most sort of extraordinary experience that you've had in your career, and walk us through it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very fortunate that it opened so many doors for me. Magic was a long, hard slog for a long, long time where I didn't make any money and nothing was kind of happening, and I just kind of like stuck with it for, I'd say, a good 7, 8 years. And then the instance that I mentioned at the very beginning of this chat, where I said I came to Indonesia to perform at a hotel out in
Hmm.
Sumba. So that hotel at the time was called Nihi Watu. It's now called Nihi Sumba. If anyone wants to look it up, it's the most incredible place I've ever been to. It's where David Beckham, said it's the best place he's ever been. He went with his family
Wow.
for 5 days, and he extended to 10. Ed Sheeran went there, Cindy Crawford, Sting, Jennifer Lawrence had their honeymoon there. I mean, the list goes on and on. I
Yeah, yeah.
somehow ended up being invited there to perform for the billionaire owner. And at the time, just to give you some context, I was living in a conscious community retreat center in the jungle in Cambodia. So I'd kind of like given up. I'd gone to Sydney, I'd done the busking, I had got like veneers put on my teeth, I had a six pack, I was working out like crazy. I had done everything I
Wow.
thought I could possibly do to somehow influence fate to allow me to do magic on television. I'm embarrassed to admit now, but that was kind of like my obsession. I was just obsessed with like being the best magician in the world. I thought that meant being on TV, etc.
Hmm.
Never happened. I somehow end up in Cambodia. One thing leads to another. 3 years go by. I've been living. I'm not making this up. Like I was living in a conscious community with like 50 other people. A bit like I imagine what a kibbutz is like in Israel. So anyway,
Right.
somehow from there, I start performing again in Siem Reap. I decide, look, it's time to get back out there. Fly over to Bangkok. I get a few suits made. I get a tuxedo. I start reaching out, doing cold outreach to the 5-star hotels in Siem Reap. And I think, I'm just going to like kickstart things again. I set up like an Instagram page and a Facebook page, put my website back online. I'd had this sort of like 3-year break. This was between 2012 and 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And it works. People are like, oh, interesting. Okay, sure. Like, come into the hotel. Would like to meet you. So I ended up performing at a gig for some sort of like private event, someone's birthday. And there's a lady there who was the general manager of this hotel on Sumba called Nihiwatu. She sees me, happens to be a big fan. I just got really lucky, would really click. She was a lovely lady. She's actually sadly passed away now. She passed away last year. She was only like 51, but huge influence on my career, gave me my big break. So we keep in touch, and a few months go by, and she said, I'd like to hire you to do magic at Christmas time at my hotel. She was, sorry, this is before she'd gone to Indonesia. She was the general manager of the Belmont Hotel at the time in Siem Reap. So I go in, got to walk around. Everyone's having, dinner. It's a sit down situation. I'm walking around the tables. Then she says, could you come and do a stage show on New Year's Eve? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. Another few months go by, and I actually reached out to her and said, hey, listen, her name was Carla. I said, Carla, you've been such a big supporter. Thank you very much. And you've always been so kind of encouraging and positive, and her face would just really light up. She just really loved it. And she just never replied to me, which I thought was strange. And I sent her another email, and she never replied again. And I thought, you know what? I don't have her phone number. I'm going to look her up on Facebook. So I looked her up on Facebook, and I sent her a message, and I said, hey, Carla, I've sent you a few messages. I'm starting to think maybe your email isn't working or it's not going through. I'm really trying to like get back into magic again. I want to have another go at, being successful or just getting myself out there. And thank God I did. And that if anyone's, listening to this and, thinking that, you can just email someone once and then give up, sometimes you've really got to kind of persist. So she gets in touch and she says, hey, Sean, I'm actually in Indonesia now. I've changed hotels. I've left Cambodia. I'm now the general manager of this hotel called Nihiwatu. And then she said, would you consider coming over here to perform for the owner? Because I've been told that he is a big fan of magic. And I think this would be something really cool.
Yeah.
I said, sure, of course. They wanted me to come in June. I had a full-time job in Cambodia. I was working at this retreat center place. I was working there. I was performing one magic show a week there for like all the hippy dippy people who were on retreat. And anyway, I fly over. I prepared for this. Like, I just knew, I had a feeling this was going to be my big break. I went out and bought a whole new wardrobe of what I thought was like appropriate resort wear, kind of linen shirts and linen trousers. I probably looked like, I don't know, like Don Johnson from Miami Vice, but that's what I was kind of thinking was the appropriate wardrobe. Anyway, I go over there, and this leads to, you asked what one of the most kind of extraordinary things happened. I meet my first billionaire. So I've now performed for 5 billionaires at this point, but I'd never met one before. And the whole thing was just, it was a big build up to it. They book my tickets a couple of months before I go. I'm getting excited. I'm looking at this website every day. So anyway, I get out there. He hasn't arrived yet. I'm a bit in awe of this place. The most beautiful place I've ever seen. And I'm waiting around performing for all the guests and the staff. And I'm just, I'm really going for it. I'm just thinking I'm going to make the most of it. And I get summoned. I get told, okay, Mr. Birch would like to see some magic now. Come down to the restaurant. So I come down to the restaurant. And thankfully, and maybe this played a part, but he's dressed exactly like me. He's also got like a white linen shirt on and black linen trousers. So I'm like, okay, cool. I've got the look. And he sits down, and he's self-made billionaire. He's a very interesting guy. He's eccentric, and I got to know him very well over the next 4 years because there was a continuation to the story. But this is the first time I ever met him. And the first thing he said was, "Look, I hired David Blaine for my birthday party once, and I've never heard of you." I just thought, I mean, I'm not going to swear, right? I don't want to make this X-rated, but in my mind, I just thought, F-U-C-K-U. I just thought, okay. And I just went for it like the way I used to do magic on the street. So when I was
Yeah.
performing on the street in Sydney, like a few years before that, I would have people, coked up to their eyeballs, super drunk, stag parties, hen parties, people
Yeah.
shouting at me. The busiest street, if you've ever been on George Street in Sydney at
Yep.
like
Yep. Yep.
11 o'clock at night on a Friday or
Mental.
Saturday night, it
Mental.
is
Yeah.
intense. I used to perform in King's Cross. So if you can control 40 or 50 people who are all trying to like heckle you, and it's a constant, it becomes really just all about audience management at that point, not
Yeah.
the actual magic. So anyway, I just thought, okay,
You play
let's
that
just see
game.
what
Yeah.
happens then. So I really go for it. I really take a lot of chances. I mean, one of the things that I think really landed for him was I just took the cards, I took one out, and I just put it down on the table face down between him and I. And it was just him and I, that I was just performing for him. Oh, sorry, and his girlfriend at the time. She was also there. But it was essentially
Uh-huh.
a one on one performance. And I put the card down and I said, tell me which card I have put on the table. And he said, three of spades, which is not what you would really expect, right? A guy like that, all the money, the power, prestige, status, whatever, you think he's going to say a king or the ace of spades. That would be, just from a very basic psychological point of view, would make more
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
He turns it over, it's the three of spades. Now, that is like the cleanest, strongest piece of magic you could possibly do. It's just me taking one out, putting it down, it's already on the table. He then says what he wants. I don't touch it again, and he himself turns it over. So I just got incredibly lucky. I don't know how that happened. I have no idea.
That's
I
crazy.
just, I just went on like gut feeling, took a few chances, and then over the next 3 weeks, just really got to know him. He asked me if I wanted to go fishing with him. I did. I performed for him every night. He would invite guests over to his villa and have a dinner party, and then I would perform at the end. He
Wow.
was incredibly curious. I mean, I actually ran out of material after a week. I was actually watching YouTube videos during the day, trying to learn new material.
New. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he then, we went for a walk. We went trekking, and he said to me, and this was like a, kind of again before and after moment really in my life. He said, "What would be your dream job?" And I said, my dream job would be to like work somewhere like this, be like the resident magician in like an incredible place, meeting incredible people, adding to the kind of magical atmosphere of this, wonderful resort that you've created, and then get to travel around the world and do magic internationally. And he said, okay, let's make your dream come true then. Come
Wow.
work for me. You can be the resident magician here.
Wow. And then
Yeah.
that, amazing. That is. I mean, in something like that, obviously, you pulled out some big tricks, and you had to go big because obviously the situation. But like they could have flopped. Did you have a? Were you worried that they could have flopped or failed or?
I was really in the zone. If you've ever read the
Right.
book called Flow by,
Yeah.
I'm probably going to butcher his name, but like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, I was very influenced by that book. Where if
Yeah.
you've spent enough time practicing and you're prepared, and then you're very focused but also relaxed, I just could have done no wrong. I'd put the time in, and when I think back to like all the nights of going down my, stairs in my horrible little Sydney apartment, which was full of cockroaches, and dragging my table and chair and two buses because I lived so far out of the city, and then setting everything up and
Yeah.
standing there, not too far above, I guess, like a homeless person in the hierarchy and like people's eyes, like walking around. Um, and, working in a nightclub, being paid for 2 hours on a Friday night to walk around and just announce myself as basically
Yep.
cold open every single person in this club and perform. Restaurants, I used to do children's birthday parties all day, Saturday, Sunday. All of that stuff just kind of came together. And I guess when that, I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to perform at the right time for the right person. And it just happened. And I think because he didn't make it easy for me, I just kind of
You had to up
you
your
know
game, right?
yeah, I find that phrase really interesting. Like when people say like, "Oh, raise your game," I actually don't
Mm,
think that's what happens. I think you fall back on your technique and your experience. So
okay.
because I had already put myself in the worst possible, consciously the worst possible and most difficult performance environments, performing for people who didn't want to see me, didn't care, haven't bought a ticket, could potentially just walk away. Um, and if you can win those people over and get them to give you money and create like a thread together, a performance in a show out of nothing, um, I was just ready. I was prepared and very lucky. I mean,
Yeah.
let's be completely honest here. I got really lucky. It was like the best magic I have ever done happened to be on like my big kind of interview. You know.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, do you remember any of the other tricks you performed for him that really you were kind of like, oh, this is a big one. I hope it goes well, kind of thing.
I just did a lot of sort of like mind reading stuff, where I would ask him
Okay.
a question about like, his children and I think I guessed someone's name or the date, not quite the date, the month that they were born. My signature effect is I get someone to write their name, and this is not unique to me. This is like a
Yeah.
classic which is performed all over the world. But I just have a little bit of a kind of twist on it. I got him to write his name on a card. The card appears, it disappears, it's on top, it's in the middle, it's in my pocket, and then it ended up in my wallet, which is in my back pocket. And I'm doing this with rolled up sleeves, no jacket. It's in my wallet. I take out my wallet, I open it up, and inside the wallet is a sealed envelope. I hand him the envelope. It's completely sealed. This is a completely legit envelope. It's takes a bit of effort to open it. He opens it up, and his card is inside. Um, the book thing, he absolutely loved that. I did that a few nights later for him at his house. I mean,
Yeah.
he eventually what happened is I became his personal magician. So for the next
Yeah.
4 years, I spent a summer in the Hamptons where I was entertaining his guests.
Oh
I
man.
spent a lot of time in New York. He had
Yeah.
about 50 companies. He sent me all over the world to events like charity golf tournaments and trade shows, and so he saw a lot of
Amazing.
magic over the next 4 years.
And we talked about this before we jumped on the call, but there's a story that sort of spins off from your experience in the hotel with, I think, your ex-wife and something in Cape Town. Are
Yeah,
you able to talk us through
yeah,
that one?
yeah. So you asked me something that really kind of like stood out. So 4 years later, I'm now an international magician flying around the world. I was doing 100 flights a year. By this point, I had married uh, the woman who was the yoga teacher at the resort. We ended up becoming a couple and we're getting married. And I accompany her to a retreat. So she's also now very well connected in, meeting people like,
Uh,
I don't know, fashion designers and ultra rich, wealthy women who like yoga. And we get connected through a South African lady to someone else who happens to own this massive nature reserve. She has been told that my ex-wife is this most wonderful, amazing yoga teacher, which she was. She was fantastic, and she was uh, based at the resort most of the time. But then she would also lead her own retreats. So she would like hire out
oh, cool.
a beautiful place in nature, get 7 or 8 women together, and it would kind of be like a digital detox, vegan, healthy food, nature. Her thing was nature, no alcohol, yoga, and meditation. So I'm accompanying my ex wife to this retreat that she's doing, and it was just stunning. I mean, it was a
Yeah.
beautifully preserved kind of classical country home. We get there a couple of days early before everyone else. I'm helping her, sort of like set everything up, and then everyone arrives, and it's essentially like, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, but kind of like what I would imagine the cast of the Real Housewives of Cape Town to be,
Yeah.
or Johannesburg,
Yeah.
and it was these very sort of affluent, just socialite women, quite a lot of like plastic surgery, and I think a few rivalries as well. I was definitely
Yeah.
picking up on that. But anyway, everyone really relaxed into it. The retreat is going incredibly well. People are really bonding. The ones that don't know each other are getting to know each other. And along the way, I'm just a kind of innocent bystander, right? I was not there in any sort of official capacity to do anything. So anyway, one of the women, I think, fancied herself as a bit of a psychic, a kind of like amateur
Interesting.
psychic. She had some tarot cards, and I just think was interested to explore the, um, I don't know, let's just call it like an esoteric, like spiritual world, but maybe
Yep.
it would have seemed a bit woo woo in the city and like Cape Town. So in the setting, you have to imagine we're surrounded by nature. There's no one else there. You can't hear or see any roads or cars. We're essentially in a private nature reserve, and everything is taken care of for us. And it felt like we had been transported back in time, like 150 years ago. So anyway, I am intrigued, and I just kind of naturally, organically, kind of comes up. I'm a magician. I think people already knew that. People are asking a little bit more about it. So I said, if you like, one night after dinner, I'll do a magic show. And they all said yes. Now it's incredible how, again, the setting and the venue influences the kind of
Yeah, you were
material and
saying
how
earlier.
it's received. Yeah. So it's quite windy, right? And it's dark and there's no lights outside, and people are staying in these sort of little kind of cabins close to the main house, and then we would all go in. They were essentially cottages.
Yeah.
Imagine if you have like a big estate, and then you've got like little cottages kind of around the estate, and everyone goes to the big sort of main house. So it's a bit creepy. There's
Hmm.
animals out there and noises and stuff, and you come in. It's a very old house. So I decide, you know what? I am going to do a séance. I just thought this is something I've always wanted to do. I've always just been looking for the right venue, the right kind of atmosphere, the right group of people. I'm not going to do anything with like cards or anything more traditional magic. I'm going to really just frame this as in a seance. And if someone specifically asks me, "Are you psychic?" I'll say no, I'm not. This is for entertainment purposes. But I just wanted to lean into that. So anyway, I did, and after dinner, everyone sits round this beautiful table. There's like a sofa there. There's an armchair here, an armchair there, and I'm thinking to myself, "Wow!" I'm like in South Africa with some of the wealthiest women in the country in a private nature reserve in this stunning, amazing house, and I'm essentially doing like a Derren Brown
Yeah.
episode. You
That's
know?
what came to mind because I don't know if other people watched it, but that Darren Brown episode, the seance episode, is a real sort of sticks in my mind as one of like a real highlight of sort of his show. So
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just again to give a little bit of a caveat here, like I'm just to be clear, I'm not comparing myself to Derren Brown. Derren Brown, if
yeah.
people don't know, it would be like the equivalent of me, being a professional singer or piano player who's managed to make a living from doing it, and he would be like Mozart. Do you know what I mean, or
Okay.
or
Okay.
Beethoven or something. So that's the golf. That's
Okay.
the kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
distance there. But I just thought to myself, I'm gonna do like a séance. So essentially, I did multiple things. I did similar things to like the book. I did a hypnosis thing. I had one woman stand on one side of the room, another woman stand over here. I sort of touched one's nose, the other one had her eyes closed. She swears she felt it. I tapped one on the shoulder, the other one felt it. I hypnotized the girl and she more or less fainted. I actually had to support her, hold her, and like sit her
Oh
down in like a
wow.
chair. She was completely out. I was, kind of taken aback by that. I'd never had that type of reaction before. I think it was just all the energy in the room.
Yeah.
She was the youngest person there. She was only like 18 or 19 and
Yeah.
extremely susceptible. Anyway, the big moment
Wow.
came. I had a kind of glass bowl, which I had borrowed earlier, and I had gone round and I had passed out pencils. I did a lot of the art materials there. I gave everyone a pencil and a couple of slips of paper, and without, hamming it up too much, but at the same time without diminishing it, I'd struck a sort of balance where I'd said, listen, I'm going to be asking the spirits later to come through and answer at least one question for each person. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I'll do my best. And all you've got to do is just write down something that you're genuinely curious about. And you could say, like, what's my PIN number? But I would say that's a bit of a waste. I would treat this as an opportunity to get an insight into something that you're genuinely, you know, thinking about or would like to get some sort of guidance. Now, bear in mind, everyone is like, just been doing chakra opening workshops and,
Yeah.
yoga twice a day and meditation. So everyone's
They're
mind
in the
is pretty
space.
open at this point,
Yeah,
right?
they're pretty primed.
They're
Yeah.
they're in the zone. This isn't just like, coming home on a Wednesday night straight off the commute and you're tired and you
Yeah.
just want to watch TV. People are like relaxed, engaged. So anyway, so everyone does it. They write up. I tell them fold it up very tight, drop it in the bowl. The bowl is in full display the whole time. Blah blah blah. So now we have, maybe 20, 25 pieces of paper in here. So with it's called the Oracle Act, and this is a real kind of classic from the 1800s, kind of like Victorian era vaudeville performances in London. And, Darren Brown's done an amazing job at kind of reviving that and modernizing it. You reach in, you take a piece of paper out, you hold it up, and you essentially channel like a spirit to know what is written in there. You never open it up. And then through me, provide an answer. And
Hmm.
then what you do is, you open it up, show everyone, and you throw it in the fire, and then you carry on. So
Gotcha.
one of the questions was, should I leave my husband?
Jesus.
Yeah. And I was like, wow,
Hmm.
this is real, you know? And, I've got my ex wife staring at me, and I'm sure anyone who's ever been married and, kind of angered their spouse will know what that feels like, where she's just like daggers, like, what are
Yeah.
you doing? This is like my retreat, and you've turned it into some kind of like, seance magic show. Like, also, she obviously, knows that I am not psychic in any way. And
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
in case anyone's wondering, I am not psychic. I have no psychic ability. Um, and I think as long as you're, honest with that, and you kind of don't have to get everyone to sign a waiver and say, hey, I understand and accept. You can play with it a little bit to entertain people. But I think she was like concerned that this was going a bit too far.
Hmm.
Anyway, I just decided to kind of be as diplomatic as possible there. And I said, well, someone here has a big decision. I'm picking up that there's something that you've been wrestling with for a while, and this could potentially be a life changing decision, and it's going to affect you and your family, and I think particularly your husband. I think this is like a marital thing. You don't have to tell me who you are, but if you do understand, if this is resonating, then the spirit is very clear, and it says that only you know the answer, and you will come to your own conclusion. And then I just threw it in the fire. Um,
Wow.
but yeah,
That
that
is
was
diplomatic.
kind of like the beginning of the end. Actually, after that, I kind of lost interest in magic, and then I think within about a year or two after that, I was retired.
Wow. That quick. And
I mean, I'd been doing it a long time at that point. At that point, the journey felt complete. But I just reached a point where I thought, wow, my performances here are about as good as I hoped they ever would be.
yeah.
It felt like I had sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve. And maybe the mistake I had made is I hadn't set my goals a little bit higher.
Mm.
I mean, I would say I want to be the best magician in the world, but I was like very abstract. If I was to break it down, like going to America, I got to perform at the Magic Castle. I did a TV show in Singapore. The whole resident magician at the number one hotel in the world. Like it felt as if a lot of things had been ticked off, and I just then, and it was a struggle. I had like a 1 or 2 year period where I was like, oh, I should really be making more of this, or I should be grateful. But I'm completely okay with it now. But it came to an end, and I just had to kind of like let it go. Like the circle was complete. Whatever it was that had compelled me from the beginning and really pushed me forward had just reached its kind of conclusion. So that night in South Africa was such an incredible experience and so good, and the atmosphere was so like live. Um, that yeah, I think that was it. It helped to kind of just allow me to move on to other new things.
Close the chapter. Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to go back just on there's something that the ethics are fascinating with magic sometimes because you do have a responsibility sometimes because some people, even though if you state it clearly that I'm not psychic, I have no superpowers or whatever, people still believe what's going on, and may think that there is something more powerful. And do you feel like there is a weight of responsibility on magicians and illusionists to really be cognizant of the ethics of what they're doing in certain situations?
Absolutely. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a great question. A lot of people get carried away with themselves. They start believing their own hype. A lot of people don't really actually fully understand the psychology, so they're doing it more the surface level. They're performing the material, but they think that it is got something to do with them, and maybe they're reading people's mind for real, or
Mm.
obviously I don't know what's going on in each person's head, but the best way to kind of diffuse that, like what I've found over time, is if someone says, "But you are psychic. I know you are psychic."
Yeah.
I'll say, "How confident are you in that belief from like 1 to 10?" And if they say 9 or 10, I saw you. I've seen you with my own eyes, right? And I go, okay. And what if I was to show you that, just seeing it with your own eyes is actually unreliable? Would that
Hmm.
change your confidence from like a 9 or a 10? Would that lower it? And they go, yeah, I think so, yeah. And I'll say, okay, so what would you do if someone in another country saw someone like walking on water or flying, and then told you that they believe in magic and they know this person can fly and they know they can walk on water because they saw it with their own eyes? Would you in any way doubt that, or think maybe it could be for another reason? And then the kind of penny drops, and without being like confrontational or trying to argue and say, I am not, it's kind of like that Monty Python sketch, I'm not the
He's
real
the
Messiah.
Messiah.
Oh, yes, you are. Okay, I am the Messiah. See, yes, you are. Oh, I'm not.
Yeah.
Oh, only the true Messiah would say that, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you can get someone to sort of see that their thought process does not universally apply, and I found that this also works with people who have, strong opinions about things which are demonstrably false. Like for example,
Yeah.
people who think that the Earth is flat.
Hmm.
It's not because they've reached a conclusion after putting everything through a kind of ordered sequence, or using some sort of like framework, like a falsifiable framework to see what the actual result is. It just feels good to them, and it could be because they distrust the government, or their
Yeah.
friends have this opinion, or it felt good in the moment, etc. So yeah, there is like an ethical requirement there, and you can avoid a lot of that by just being careful with the material that you perform, like the seance stuff or talking to someone from the dead. I find that stuff very cringe, and
Mm.
um, unless it's done really well, like someone like Darren Brown, I think pulls it off well. But if it's done badly, it's just in bad taste.
Yeah, like you say, it's when you get offered a question like, "Should I leave my husband?" Like you really open yourself up to some difficult scenarios if you if you don't answer that question right. So wow,
Yeah,
that's amazing. I was going to ask you about what you're doing now, because if you're not, a full-time magician, you're doing other stuff, and are you taking the skills that you've learned, over the many years as a magician and applying them to what you're doing now?
yeah, I found it actually works remarkably well for sales. So I've had like quite a successful career in sales. It just
Interesting.
a lot of the kind of persuasion techniques. If you're doing ethical selling and you truly believe that what you're offering someone is a good service or product for them to buy, it's actually incredibly similar the way you would structure like a kind of magical performance or effect to selling something to somebody.
That's so. Again, going back to the ethical question, it's like if you have the ability to read people, literally almost, from an outside perspective, read people's minds, and you can try to sell them stuff or hypnotize them to buy things. But it must be an incredible skill set. Just as a final question, I always love asking guests just to provide any advice for anyone listening who might want to follow in your footsteps. As a magician, someone who really wants to sort of reach the heights that you reached, and the skill level, what advice do you have for anyone listening?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm kind of in two minds about this, so maybe I'll just very quickly give both sides of the coin. So I would say for something like this, for something like magic, you've got to kind of ignore your friends and family a little bit because they're either going to be too nice and they're going to say, "Oh, you're amazing, you're fantastic, blah blah blah," or they're going to be too critical, and they don't
Hmm.
really have any knowledge really, especially if unless one of them happens to be a professional magician. So I think you've got to really be prepared to just do your own thing and stay focused. And what will inevitably happen is the motivation will go. It will disappear at some point. It might take you 6 months, it might take you 2 years, but really, you can't rely on that. You've got to really rely on commitment. You have to make a
Mm.
commitment that you're going to see it through until a certain point, and there'll be many, many uncomfortable, painful things that you do not want to do, like getting on stage for the first time, walking up to someone for the first time, announcing yourself as a magician, putting yourself in an extremely vulnerable kind of performance situation where things could go wrong. Like you're constantly going to be going through a challenging kind of situation. But I'm a big believer in like real personal growth is always painful. So
Hmm.
if you're okay with that and you embrace it, the rewards will come, but it takes a long time. On the other hand, if someone was thinking about becoming a magician and really wants to dedicate their life to it, the other part of me kind of wants to say like just be careful what you wish for. You know, I don't really know if I would necessarily go through all of this again. If I could go
Really?
back to the beginning, I might just tell myself, don't do it, you know?
Wow. Really? It just in terms of what you've had to sacrifice or what you've had to put yourself through or what reason?
Yeah, I mean, not to, I mean, it's just essentially, it's just, you're only doing card tricks. It's not to make it,
Mm.
something that it's not, but like the psychological sort of torment and pain and pushing yourself to the limit to kind of like be perfect at something that can never really be perfected
Yeah.
is just incredibly lonely and challenging and just I mean you perform for like 20 or 30 minutes if you're lucky, and then you've got all that time in between where again you're just practicing. I mean, and just
Yeah.
the dexterity alone. Anyone who's played tennis to like I can play tennis maybe at like an intermediate level or like piano or guitar. Anyone who knows, how hard it is just to become a kind of intermediate pianist. Imagine then trying to get to uh, concert
Level.
pianist level where you're traveling around the world. I mean, even people who make it to the conservatory and study piano performance, most of those people never go on to ever, they end up working in some other kind of maybe related field, but it is only very, very, very few who, take it to that next level. It's such an incredible endeavor. But if me saying that and someone is listening to that and you're actually excited by that, which I was,
Yep.
then go for it,
It,
And I mean, I knew nobody, I had no connections. It's not like I had an uncle who was a magician or something. I didn't
mm,
have any, this is almost kind of like the very early stage of like people really using the internet. It wasn't like now where there's
yeah.
online courses. I was ordering DVDs, DVDs being sent over from America and like watching them and pausing them and, uh, yeah, good luck. I'll just say good luck if anyone wants to try and take the kind of art of magic to the next level, and it, can add something to it or contribute something to it. And then I'd say well done and good luck.
It's one of those things that as someone who would want to learn, as you say, there's so many resources out there, but do magicians ever take like apprentices under their wing anymore? Is that ever a thing? Like, would you ever consider it?
I think I would. I wouldn't. It wouldn't be something like a commercial thing where I would charge someone money. I think if
Mm.
someone came along and they were willing to do what it takes, then I feel as if I would have an obligation to help them. But I'm not going to, seek that out. If that happens to, come along, I was very lucky. I had a teacher who I met like at the very beginning of the podcast. I mentioned that I bumped into. I was introduced to an English magician who said, come with us to the magic shop tomorrow in
Yeah.
Malaga. I'll introduce you to my friend. So that guy was only 18. I was 24. And he was a bit of a sort of magic prodigy. He had
Yeah.
left school already. He'd spent 6 or 7 years in his bedroom just kind of obsessively practicing, was extremely good at the kind of technique, but he didn't have a sort of fleshed out ability to like perform, and the personality and the kind of charisma. All of that did come later, but he was extremely technical, and he taught me for 2 years. And then eventually, when I went to Sydney, he moved over after I had done the year in China. We
Yeah.
both relocated to Sydney together, and we lived together in this little crummy apartment. And we both performed on George Street across from each other. Um, Unfortunately, the kind of teaching relationship became like a rivalry,
Yeah.
and I've never seen him again since. Actually, we had a falling out. We had a sort of professional rivalry that became too
Oh,
heated, and
shame.
unfortunately ruined our friendship. But we did push each other. I mean, we pushed each other so hard.
Sometimes you need that sort of competitive element to get you to push you. So fantastic, Sean. Listen, at the end, I always like to sort of say, if there's anything you want to plug, I know you're not on social media, and I know you're retired, but if anyone wanted to sort of read about you or find out about you, where could they find some information on you?
Yeah, I mean, I still have my website. So my website is just my name. It's www.sean, Sean Borland, BORLAND.com. And, my email is on there. So if anyone wants to get in touch, I do, I do still perform. It's not like I'm never going to perform again. It's just, one piece of the pie now rather than the whole
Yeah,
thing.
the whole
But can
pie.
I just say thank you so much for having me on here? It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about this,
No
and
worries.
I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, Sean. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've honestly, we've gone on for a little bit longer than I used to with other guests, just because the conversation's been so fascinating. And yeah, I've had a blast. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode. A huge thanks again to Sean for coming on the show and just being so candid about his journey and the incredible dedication that he's put into his work. And of course, a big thanks to you all for listening and watching as well. If you'd like to learn more about Sean's work or anything else that we've talked about in this episode, you'll find links over in the show notes and, of course, on the website, noordinarymonday.com. And as always, you can find full video versions of these episodes on YouTube, and we also post stuff across our socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, and of course over on the No Ordinary Monday podcast community on Facebook. Next week on the show, I am joined by volcanologist Nico Fournier. In 2019, Nico was the lead science advisor during the infamous White Island Whakaari volcanic eruption in New Zealand, where 22 people tragically lost their lives. For Nico, what followed was a race against time, calculating the risk of another explosion, while also deciding whether it was safe to send teams back in to recover the bodies. All eyes were on him as the lead scientist. It's an incredibly fascinating conversation, and I cannot wait to share it with you guys. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are 4 simple ways that you can support the show. Number 1, just click 5 stars on this episode or the show on your podcast app. Number 2, leave us a short review. Number 3, share the episode with a friend, family member, or maybe a colleague. And then number 4, support the show at buymeacoffee.com/noordinarymonday. Any one of these things helps us keep the lights on, avoids adverts, and allows us to keep bringing you thoughtful, story-driven conversations week after week. And that's it for this episode. This podcast is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, and we'll see you next Monday.